New edition of the Twitter Files is out, this time from journalist Aaron Mate. Now, according to Mate, the FBI aided a Ukrainian intelligence effort to ban Twitter users and collect their data. In March 2022, an FBI special agent sent Twitter a list of accounts on behalf of the SBU, Ukraine's main intelligence agency. The accounts, the FBI wrote, are suspected by the SBU in spreading fear and disinformation. In an attached memo, Ukraine's SBU provided a list of accounts that it alleged had been used to disseminate disinformation and fake news to inaccurately reflect events in Ukraine. It then asked Twitter to block these Twitter accounts and provide their user data. In response to the FBI, Twitter agreed to review the accounts, but raised concerns about its inclusion of American and Canadian journalists, e.g. Aaron Mate, we've had on the show before. Now, the FBI declined to answer Aaron's question about its aid to Ukrainian intelligence censorship efforts. Quote, while we appreciate your inquiry, as a matter of practice, we do not confirm, deny, or otherwise comment on specific interactions, nor confirm the veracity of correspondence, the FBI wrote. But we're able to see the correspondence here. It's clear as day, and we have talked about this before. I think we talked about it with Lee Fong, did some reporting on how similar requests were made of Facebook. We may have even discussed these exact requests being made to Twitter, but I think without the knowledge that they've specifically referenced Aaron Mate, an independent journalist whom we've had on the show before. These requests were relayed to Twitter through the FBI. They were made by Ukrainian intelligence. Clear requests for censorship based on alleged disinformation and spreading of fear. And with a new censorship just dropped, fear-based censorship. Interestingly enough, and I think this is a point I've made a number of times, but it keeps getting more evident, that there was pushback at Twitter, including by Yoel Roth, who was initially the villain of the Twitter files. Mm-hmm. It just is not fair. He tells them that unless you give us evidence that these accounts are specifically deceptively tied to government actors, like Russia is funding this person or something, we're not going to take action. We're not going to just get rid of Canadian journalists because you don't like what they're saying.
Right. I think
it's pretty clear with there.
A really important point. It's also worth noting that this is not the result of new Twitter files releases from Elon Musk. Of course, as we've covered extensively, Elon Musk ended the Twitter files program now a couple of months ago after getting into a online fight with Matt Taibbi about the fact that Matt Taibbi also publishes on a, I guess, ostensibly competitor website, but not really. Twitter and Substack have very different functions. Regardless, and because of that interpersonal dispute, this incredibly important journalistic enterprise has been shut down. I guess it's not as important to Elon Musk as his personal dispute with Taibbi. Therefore, this is continued investigations into the files that they already have, which, of course, only go up to the time at which Elon Musk took over the company. So we're getting this continued reporting on events in the spring of 2022, which are all very well and good. But as we continue to see Yoel Roth do the right thing in these instances and say we're not actually going to succumb to your censorship request, which, by the way, is Ukrainian intelligence telling American intelligence to censor people, that chain of events is also just incredibly untoward and upsetting. But we're not getting any new information about what's happening under the current Twitter regime, which has been in place for now the bulk of the conflict with Ukraine. And we can only hope, given the lack of transparency about what's going on now, that there is someone there who is still creating a barrier to these kinds of requests at the organization. Yeah, and that's a huge shame because there's more work clearly needs to be done to understand the extent of this very pernicious efforts, by our own FBI, that should understand it is totally improper for them to filter requests from a foreign government that does not have the same kind of First Amendment values. We've seen this with Zelensky, who suspended opposition media organizations, who has taken many illiberal steps with respect to free speech and free expression in the country, raising the specter of what we're even fighting for or assisting them to fight for, if not to defend liberal values. We're being told that Ukraine is, holding, obviously Russia is the aggressor, but is illiberal and is violating people's rights and all of that kind of thing, and which I think is absolutely manifestly true. But we can't, we can't just suspend rights during a crisis because then you don't really believe in these rights. And then they're
the governments of the world are hesitant to give these rights back when the crises pass, because they never seem to pass.
Yeah.
So we should not be going along with the kind of censorship that exists in virtually every other country.
It's the shock doctrine 101 is what Naomi Klein wrote about. It's how we got so many of these post 9/11 infringements on our personal freedoms, and it is very concerning. And again, just so concerning that the kind of reporting that enabled us to know that this was going on, and the disclosures of the Twitter files that enabled us to know this was going on has come to such an abrupt end as a project. And it's very valiant of the former Twitter files journalists like Aaron Mate to keep going through the files, and Mate to keep going through the files and try to extract all that we can know from what we've been given. But it is an interesting paradox that at the same time that people like as diverse as RFK Jr. and David Sachs and all these people are heralding Elon Musk in the context of these Twitter spaces and such as the vanguard of free speech, that there is very little commentary about why this project hasn't continued if it is so important. It reminds me a little of Democrats and Joe Biden loving to say, oh, we halved child poverty. We did all these great things in the pandemic, and then make those policies time constrained and then say absolutely nothing about the fact that they just doubled child poverty. Well, if it was such a wonderful thing that you did, that you were crowing about and trying to get people to come out and vote for you because you did it, what does it mean now that you have so willingly and without a fight let that good thing stop? And there's some serious questions I think at some point need to be asked by some of these Twitter files journalists about what this project was and what Elon Musk's incentives are if he's unwilling to continue this really important journalistic enterprise.
I think it's very regrettable that this, what seemed like a very personal dispute with without a lot of clear understanding of what the situation was on Elon's side with respect to Substack, took down the whole thing.
Yeah.
Substack is a different platform, a platform for long form writing, of which does not really occur on Twitter. And I don't think there was some dispute as to whether Taibbi was an employee of Substack, which wasn't really, he didn't work for Substack, the company, any more than like I work for Facebook if I write long posts there, and then allow a subscription kind of model. So that was unfortunate because it was really good work done in the service of transparency. 2 years ago, if you'd told me, I wouldn't have, and I'm deeply suspicious, paranoid even, of what the U.S. government is doing. And the idea that the FBI was routinely talking to Twitter and saying, hey, Ukrainian intelligence would like you to take down tweets by a Canadian journalist. That would be crazy. And it was happening constantly.
It's so wild. By the way, there was some conversation about the Twitter files during the RFK Jr. Twitter Spaces earlier this week. And it was interesting because RFK Jr., perhaps because he has a background as a lawyer, asked Musk whether or not his lawyers advised him basically not to do it because of how much exposure it gave him, how much liability exposure there was. And Elon said, well, yes, they advised me not to do it, but I did it anyway. And to me, the really interesting follow-up question would have been, well, there's one level of liability when you expose what happened before you took over the company, and there's a different level of risk. I think the kind of risk that RFK Jr. was painting is very heroic, that only accrues when you're talking about the company that you are now managing. And no one really plumbed that mismatch of all of the credit RFK Jr. was giving to Elon Musk, which I think is due up and to a point, but then the failure to continue to have that level of transparency and disclosure. And RFK Jr. also mentioned that there was some Section 230 conversation, and he mentioned that, he thinks it's important and these protections need to exist, but also that when platforms start behaving like editors, then that changes the dynamic. And that really transparency is an important part of why platforms that are not publishers should be allowed to be free of some of the liabilities that traditional publishers face. But without that transparency, without being willing to show what your algorithms are doing and how you're making these decisions, and really proving that you're not putting your thumb on the scale and just hosting information, that maybe there is a room for some liability there.
Yeah, I mean, Schellenberger has made that point on our show a couple times with respect to transparency. The issue I have with that is they're always going to have their thumb on the scale in some way, right? Unless it's just literally a chronological feed of everything that appears. Like there is Facebook's newsfeed, for instance, like has to make algorithmically derived choices of what to show you. I mean, or you can click the option for just a chronological feed, but it's trying to show you things that are more relevant to your interests.
But it's not that you're not allowed to have an algorithm, but an algorithm that says, when you open up Twitter, when you sign in or you sign into Facebook, it'll say, what are you interested in? Sports, education, entertainment, blah, blah, blah. You click your options, and then the algorithm can continue to build on the choices that you make as you click, like, share content.
Right.
I think having transparency and saying my algorithm follows your interests based on what you do and what you select is a perfectly legitimate algorithm. What people are concerned about is algorithms that do things like try to push conflict content, fight videos, the kinds of things that people have observed are more prevalent now on Twitter. Or as Elon Musk has said, he's admitted to wanting to put a better balance of both right-wing and left-wing content in your feed, regardless of what your personal choices are. So if at that point you're curating people's feed along ideological lines, are you then something closer to a publisher, and should you be able to take the benefit of the Section 230 protections?
Right, that's the debate. And conservatives for a long time, a lot of them had said no, I think very short-sightedly, because getting rid of those predictions would take down Twitter as it exists now, right? They rely on those protections.
Well, or you can have transparency, and you can show your algorithms, and you can undo whatever it is that you might be doing that is trying to ideologically skew what is supposed to be just a platform. Right,
but all choices are ultimately ideological. Like, what counts as sport? Even like, what are your interests? What count? Well, I like sport. Well, how is the algorithm deciding what sports content is? How is it deciding all of those things? Like, those are all, what I'm saying is those are all choices that get programmed into the algorithm, and someone will object to it no matter how it is.
I don't think it's quite that simple. I think that algorithms that are based on your selection preferences are a very different thing than what Elon Musk has literally admitted to, which is trying to make an ideological skew on the website. But that's a much longer conversation. We should definitely get some more Section 230 types into debate, and we'll have more Rising for you right after this.